I'm so passionate about this. This is my favorite part of what I do. I love empowering entrepreneurs. And I think it is tough, but there's a process. So what I tell advisors is, hey, I'm your strategic partner. Let's hash out the details. Let me give you that space where there's no team member, there's no one biased here. Talk to me about what you truly want to do.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Advice Business Podcast. Kelsey, we have another guest today, and this is on a topic that I feel like you are going to sort of extreme nerd out on, because this is what you talk about on a daily basis, is what you deal with internally at Seeds. And I don't know, it's just like what you wake up in the middle of the night thinking about, I think.
It's my passion. It's my hobby and my passion.
Yeah, it's everything. You can mention some of the work you've been doing on this topic as well that, if people aren't aware of yet. But to frame it up, we're a technology company at Seeds. So we're building a solution that obviously we think is very valuable for advisory firms to be more efficient and to create a better experience, but specifically around the investment piece of what they do. So the technology is not solving everything. And advisory businesses are super complex. There's a lot going on. Advisors do a lot of things, and their businesses have to support that. So we always are talking about, and you in particular are always talking about, how do we help firms sort of beyond the scope of what our technology does? But we're not a consulting firm. We can't really fully get into these businesses and pick them apart and really understand everything that's going on. We want to try to do a better job, arguably, than other technology companies and have that really be embedded in what we do. But there's a lot going on. So we want to unpack how we think about that at Seeds, but how people, and one person in particular in the industry, are actually doing exactly that. Going into these businesses and finding all of the issues operationally and team structure, all these different pieces, so that you can successfully utilize things like Seeds. So Kels, with that, where do you want to go from here?
Yeah, so I definitely want to just introduce our guest and get into it, because I've had a couple conversations with her so far. And like you said, I'm prepared to nerd out today. But yeah, just to kind of frame it up, I'm about to introduce our guest who has basically like my dream job. And I feel like this is the job I should actually go work for you, Charesse.
I've been trying to avoid this conversation for trying to make sure Kelsey doesn't leave.
I'm trying to get hired over at Level Best. So our guest is Charesse Spiller of Level Best. And Charesse, I'm not even going to try to explain your background on your behalf. I always try to do that with guests, and it's super awkward and weird because obviously you know this way better than me. So I will turn it over to you for background, and then I want to just dive right in on all the questions that we have and all the things we hear from advisors with you. So over to you. Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you both. So as Kelsey mentioned, Charesse Spiller, founder, principal consultant of Level Best, creator of FinOps Co-Op. I am based in Houston, Texas, originally from Pittsburgh. I like to always talk about my roots because I will be a Steelers fan as long as I live. So go Steelers.
Oh, no.
So at Level Best, we help RIAs scale their business through streamlined operations. So scalable technology, repeatable processes, and team empowerment. So we work ourselves out of a job. For advisors, it may not make sense, but we work with firms. We guide them through a curriculum that I built a few years ago on how to scale their practice. And so we work with firms roughly like 9 months up to, 2 years. We also have a short-term engagement for those smaller RIAs. 3 years ago, I had an advisor ask me a question. Hey, Charesse, this is great. We've built good systems. So what do I do now? And I'm like, you need to hire someone to run your operations. And they're like, well, I have an assistant. Is that who I hire? And I'm like, no. And they're like, well, what about me? I'm the founder. I should run my operations. I'm like, you're not really good at it. And so that's where FinOps Co-Op came.
Yeah.
So I'm a big educator in the industry on what operations is, what it should look like, and who should run it. And so that's where community and consulting comes into play at Level Best.
Great. That is a perfect intro to what we want to talk about first. And I actually think we've spoken about this on the podcast before, but we've heard time and time again, we hear a lot of confusion, I think, in the industry about what operations even is and what is an operator. I think because there are a lot of unique operational components to running an RIA. So I do think a lot of times like investment operations and like portfolio operations and compliance related operational stuff overshadows like overarching business operations and just what is operations at all and who should be running it. So I hear that a lot from firms we work with is like, oh, I already have an operations person. But when I meet the person, they are strictly focused on like essentially portfolio operations or compliance or something much more narrow than what I would define it to be. So I would love to start by like hearing your definition of operations and what role operations play in a firm, especially an earlier stage independent firm.
To simplify it, I look at operations in 3 buckets: people, process, and technology. So when you think about your business, you have the people that are working in it, you have the technology that's supporting it, and then you have the processes as well that has the system. So when I think about the solos or even like any small business owner, like if you feel like your business is running you and not the other way around, then you need to look at your operations in those 3 areas.
Yeah, that's perfect. And I love the people process technology framework. We talked a little bit about this before we recorded a while back, but I love the equal focus on not only just process and technology. I think sometimes technology overshadows because you let your technology define your process, but then also the inclusion of people, which I think is like the number one most missing thing, at least in my experience of like talking to founders and them thinking process and technology together or like having good systems is really operations, and they miss the people part, which to me is where there's so much like gray area and there's so many things that can be going on there. So talk to me about like how you think about those 3 things and how they interplay together in firms. And like when you're going in, this is like now a huge loaded question, but when you're going into a firm and you're looking at it, like you're getting started, getting to know them, how are you looking at those 3 different kind of pillars or 3 different areas independently and then how they intersect?
Yeah. So how do I look at people, process, technology, and how do they intersect? So that's a great question. So when I think about the first thing I want to start with is leadership. So a lot of advisors don't understand the multiple hats that they're wearing. So like, you know, owner and operator is 2 separate things. And so when it comes down to people, process, technology, the technology piece is underrated, especially right now, because a lot of advisory firms, when I go in, they want to jump to hiring. They focus on just putting more bodies, on in their practice, but the technology and process should support that. And so the first thing that we like to do with technology is educate the advisory firms on what's available to them. So I'm a big component of reinventing your tech stack. So when we go into RIAs, we're not necessarily saying, hey, you need all these different tools, but most RIAs have what's available to them. They already have good tools. They just haven't had time to look at it. So technology should be supporting your people and your processes. So that's one piece. It's not going to solve anything. It's just a supporting factor. When it comes down to process, this is where everyone needs to start with their operations. Processes is like your roadmap. I like to talk about productized service. A lot of advisors get uncomfortable when I say productized service because this is a relationship business, but you should be guiding them through a tried and true process. So once you lay that foundation of how you want to operate, being the visionary of your practice, like that's really important. And then the final piece is people. So this is where leadership comes in because you have to guide everyone on your team to where you're going. And so I think that's where the people piece comes in, is like they should be able to plug into the process and the technology and follow the framework that you've built for your practice. So a lot of employees want to be guided. They want to be led. And if you leave them up to their own devices, that's where lack of clarity comes in, frustration, high turnover in staff. And so it's really hard. I get it. Like, I'm a business owner myself. I have my own team internally, and it can be tough to have all of the answers, but setting up a culture where people understand, like, hey, like, this is where we're headed, and having time to talk to your team, I think is like really important too.
Charisse, you talked about that diagnosis initially with leadership, and
Hmm.
I'm curious, what's interesting, and I think what we see too when we start talking to firms, leadership has identified that something is wrong. So they're reaching out to you. They're booking the meeting to have this conversation. I'm curious how you see their self-diagnosis not aligning with your diagnosis and how you move forward in those situations. We talk a lot about, and Kelsey, you should plug the work you've done with our guide, but this constraint around the founder and what they're good at and what they're not. And, you mentioned they're an owner and they're an operator, and then they may be the salesperson and they may be the financial planner, and there are 10 other things. And so they may be thinking, oh, I just need another quote unquote ops person, when they don't even necessarily know exactly what that means. But really the constraint is that they haven't sort of self-identified what they should be doing and not doing in the business.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, how do you grapple with that when you go into these firms and you do that diagnosis and they're thinking it's another problem, but it's really them and their perception of what they should be doing or not doing? And how do you move that forward?
Yeah. I think about, I call them the large lies that, a lot of business owners tell themselves. So like, one of them is like, I just need to hire someone. And it's like, I hear that's the number one thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you don't need to hire someone. You need infrastructure. You need to evaluate your infrastructure. And a lot of us, when we make decisions and we're at capacity and we're busy, it's like, well, we should have done this like weeks ago, months ago, years ago. So it's like throwing money at the problem. So like, when someone tells me I just need to hire someone, the first thing that I do is like get curious around, okay, like, do you have your process, do you have repeatable systems in place? When's the last time you looked at technology? And businesses want to look bigger by having people, but then there's a lot of problems on the inside. There's chaos. The advisor is really reactive. So like, that's the second piece here. I'm making good money. We have good profit and we're doing good. And it's like, okay, great. How's your personal life?
Yeah.
Are you actually leading your team? So I had an advisor tell me, I want to spend 10% of my time on CEO work. And it's like, okay, you have 6 people on staff that you're paying and they are underperforming. You don't have any other licensed professional on your team. You are the only person that can do revenue generating activity. That's a problem. You're not going to scale because you're not pouring into your team. You have an associate here, finished the CFP program and is eager. But that person, to me, if you're telling me I'm making good money, I must be doing fine. You're in advisor mode. You're in rainmaker mode. You're not in CEO mode. Because if you're in CEO mode, you're not thinking only about today, but you're thinking about the future of the business. And what does the future of the business look like if you're the only person that can generate revenue? If you need a vacation, if you need to take time off, what's going to happen? If everyone has to funnel through you to get something done, you're not building a business, you are the business. And so those are some of the things that I have to talk to advisors about when they're trying to diagnose their problems. And it's uncomfortable sometimes, but that's why they brought me on, right? To guide them to the solutions that they haven't thought about, to be that strategic partner that can help them overcome these obstacles.
Yeah, I think throughout the last couple answers you gave, you really are touching on it's funny because like everyone knows they need people and they need process and they need technology, and it's just how you define that and how you actually use the people and how you actually use the technology and how you define the process and then use and hold people accountable to it and update it over time. Like there's so much, like I think that's the thing I like the most about thinking about operations is that it's just not clear cut. It's something that when you think about it logically, you're like, that's clear cut. But once you're actually in it, there's so much that's different between one firm and the next or one startup and the next. And then there's so much that's the same. There are so many just like fundamental things that people just skip over or just think they're the exception to the rule. And that's kind of one of the things I wanted to hit on. You kind of just touched on some of the challenges, but Zach teed you up for it with what we've seen. I would love to hear kind of what you see really consistently as like a blind spot, or what you come in and you kind of observe as like a misconception or blind spot with firms that you're able to really, especially firms where you're able to make a really quick, huge difference for them. Like what are they just missing, or like they have the like the large lie that they're telling themselves.
I would say like CEO, chief everything officer. Like that is a big pain point for firms, because I think advisors start practices because they're good advisors. And they don't know how to scale their business. They just don't. And like they think, I'm just going to keep making more and more money, but they don't know how to break cycles. And so like there's a lot of patterns where, you know, I think about the surge meeting process. A lot of advisors do that, and they're like, we're really busy right now, we're in surge. And then after surge, they're busy with something else in the business. And so they don't understand that like you can only look past your nose right now. Like you need to start being forward thinking in your practice. So I think that's the consistency that I see. Like for 2 years, I think like the last like 2 years in business, consistently, advisors didn't understand how to delegate operations in their practice. So that's the trends that we're seeing. Those are the recommendations that we're giving. And when I talked about in this initial conversation, working ourselves out of a job, it's also to empower these firms to work independently, to understand how to disperse the different tasks in their practice. And so that's the biggest problem that I'm seeing is like, you know, the founders like running Salesforce on the back end. And it's like, you don't have time to do that. And they're like, okay, I don't have time to do that, but no one on my team has the skill set. And so the skill set of operations is not being taught in the space. You can be a CPA, you can be a CFP, you could do all these things. And, you know, honestly, hey, I'm an operations consultant, but for me, I'm done. I've been doing this for 9 years. I love what I do, but I think there's a bigger problem. Like we're working with one firm at a time, helping them with their practice. But at the end of the day, the industry needs to shift as a whole and help these advisors partner with good operators to build better businesses and help more people along the way with their finances.
And Charesse, it's amazing how big this problem is, to your point, right? The industry, you have advisors that for the most part were rainmaker planners that aren't necessarily rock star CEO/operators. And I would imagine when you come into these firms, as we talk about this diagnosis and maybe their self-diagnosis isn't quite yours, is there a point where, and this is sort of oversimplifying, but this person is either going to get onto that operator CEO track and is offloading their rainmaker and or planning work, or the opposite, go be a rainmaker because it's what you're good at and what you like to do. And if you want to be involved in planning and in the client relationships because that's what you love and that's why you wake up every day. But this whole operations piece and this CEOing thing isn't for you. I would imagine those are tough conversations. And then obviously it's a different path forward. It's either, you know, on that side, we need to find an operator. We need to find somebody who can run this business. After you go in and fix things, who's going to be in that seat if that person is not going to be it? And inversely, if they are it, how do we train them into it? And then how, are we backfilling in the other areas? So yeah, I'm just curious, that to me is like a big moment in your relationship with these advisors, and you kind of have to decide what track you're putting them on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's a loaded question. And Zach, yes, I don't think I ever have that conversation with advisors, but I can always tell the direction that they want to head. But I think for most CEOs, and I'm sure you both can relate, it's just they need time to make that decision and to have that reflection point and silence the noise in their practice. But I think most of these advisors have what it takes to scale their practice. And so you bring up a point with that CEO piece. I work with some advisors that want that micro enterprise under 10 people on their team. I have advisors that I call them high performing solopreneurs who are making 800,000 to $1.5 million a year with one person on their team, and they're doing great. And they want to simplify, and scaling for them is just getting larger clients and being happy there. And so I think understanding for RIA owners, understanding how they want to grow themselves and not being pressured by the industry standards of what success looks like, I think is the first step, getting clear on what they want their practice to look like. And then the second step is understanding that support doesn't have to look like a full-time COO on staff. So there's a lot of fractional options. There's a lot of different things that they can do to put their operations a little bit more on autopilot. I think that's the second piece is filling the gap. So I tell a lot of the firms that we work with, I would say can be smaller teams, 2 million and under in recurring revenue, upward to 10 million in recurring revenue. All of them have the same problem. There's no one there that can run operations. So that's what I'm always dealing with. But what I tell advisors, one quick thing that you can do is assign everyone on your team a secondary role. So for example, we have an associate advisor on staff. Your associate advisor is now the point person for financial planning software. And so anytime something breaks, I think the founder should not be responsible to fix it. I think leadership is the manager. So, hey, something in the system needs changed. Are we able to approve it? Yes, I approve this change. Now someone else go and implement that change and manage that change. I think that's an easy way to separate it. So when we're working with firms, it's okay, these few people are trained on how to troubleshoot the back end of planning software, the back end of the form systems, and then also cross training. Even if teams are small, if you have 2 people on your team, guess what? They both need to be trained on how to manage these solutions on the back end. So I think that's one way where business owners can come up for air to assess, what they want their practice to look like, to decide, should we, join a corporate RIA, should we be independent to make those decisions? And I think for business owners, don't forget about yourself, because as a leader, you need to be happy with the practice that you've built. And so I am big on that. I want to help advisors run their practice and not the other way around where the practice is running them. That's what I tell every advisor that we come in and want to help them with.
You just made me think of, and sorry, Kelsey, now I'm nerding out and asking these questions. So this will be my last one for the time being. You're going in and presumably the advisor, the leadership has brought you in for some reason. There's some pain point. They're stressed out, right? They know there's something going on. And then you have this conversation about sort of their version of the diagnosis, your version of the diagnosis. But can you talk about how often you go in and really the question is, what are we even aiming at? What is the point of all of this? What are we doing here? What is the 5, 10 year, 20 year, 50 year vision of what you're trying to do, whatever stage the business is in? I, from personal experience, know that can be opaque. So it's kind of like, yes, there's things that are inefficient and there's tactical things and issues, but what are we aiming at? What is the whole point of this? I'm curious, how often you come in and what you see in that regard of maybe a lack of specificity in what they're actually trying to accomplish with the business itself across, whatever periods of time.
Yeah. Most advisors can't articulate that directly to me, but like as a consultant, I feel like I listen more than I speak when I talk to advisors. And so like what I'm finding is like the reasons why advisors are coming to me for operations may be quality of life is one. So like their leadership is really bogged down, they're working long hours and they want to be freed up. The other piece may be acquisitions of business. That's a big one where it's like, hey, we're acquiring practices and we thought we had a system, but we don't because now that we brought on this practice, like it's not working well. They are overstaffed. Like, hey, like based on industry standards, like we're overstaffed. Um, and I would say like with that, like technology is just changing the way that they work. Final piece, partnerships. So partners are not on the same page and they want to get on the same page. Systems can help with all of these problems. And so what we do is we come in and as I told you, they all were able to identify their pain points and where they want to go and what they want to feel, what they want that result to be like. I am not a business coach. I'm a consultant. Like I go in to teach a skill. And so like if I hear these problems, I can say, hey, yes, systems can support it. Here's how. The areas that we like to cover, technology education, highlighting how they can maximize their systems. Accountability chart is another piece. Role clarity. So, hey, there's lack of role clarity. This is why, your team isn't functioning well. Putting the right people in the right seats. So that's what we do. And then enhancing the service model through the client experience. So, what are you offering your clients and how you deliver it? Most of the time, the problems I talked about are solved through that. If they are not, some of the solutions that we're recommending may be, hey, you need a business coach to talk to about where you want to head, or they may need someone more permanent, which we do partner. Like over the past few years, it's like, hey, hire a COO, hire an operations manager, and then we partner with them to build that infrastructure. And then once we leave, they manage it for the founder. And we've done like fractional chiefs of staffs we've recommended, or all the way up to a full-time COO.
Very cool.
Yeah. I'm really curious to hear your take on, or even like a definition on what makes a good operator, because I hear, so the word operator in the startup world is huge. You've got like this kind of standing idea of like the visionary CEO who is, laying out this huge vision. And then you've got your operator who's figuring out how do we like back into that, right? And there's this like great partnership going on, but you almost never hear it. You're actually one of the first people I talked to, I think maybe the first person I've talked to who's like leading with the term within this space. So I would love to hear kind of like what makes like how do you define that, but also how you determine leveling, because I do get a lot of times, at least in my experience, there's someone on the team who's like doing operations, you know what I mean, or doing some sort of ops-ish role. And it's like, is that the right person? Are they at the right level? Can they really meet the vision? So as you guys both just said, like the vision is obviously critical, but can they then rise up to really build the operations that are required and co-lead, I guess, in that way. So I would just love to hear your thoughts on like, what is an operator? How is it either unique or the same as in other spaces? And then how should founders be thinking about like their current team? And do they have an operator that they could lean on, or should they be looking, and at what level?
Yeah, I talk about this all the time. I think there are levels to operators. I think operations can start like at entry level, mid-level, where they're an individual contributor. They have a skill where they can help impact the practice internally from within. But when I think about my ops leaders, in leadership, being able to influence others, being a change manager, influencing change, being agile, being strategic. So like the operators in our community FinOps Co-op, a lot of them have gotten promotions and they are now partners of their firm. And it's because they're able to look at the business more strategically and then put the pieces of the puzzle together. And they don't rely on their own skills and their own abilities. They're able to bring the team together to execute the vision of the CEO. They have the trust of the CEO as well. And so where a lot of operators fall down is that like most operators are very analytical. And so it's really hard for them to articulate what they're trying to do and everyone understands it. So they want to go to the CEO and they have great ideas, but the CEO either lacks trust in them or they're just having a hard time understanding. So I think like the skill set for communication, like we talk about that, like in the community is key. Being able to communicate what you're trying to accomplish is really important.
Yeah, for sure. And is it really like, can you say leveling for a role like this depends upon like the stage and the vision, like how big the vision is and where they are now and how big the team is? Is that really kind of how you would look at that piece?
Yeah, that's a great point. I've worked in billion-dollar plus RIAs myself. And then I've also consulted firms that big and consulted firms where it's just like a solo advisor to a small team. And I think like when you're looking at those larger firms who have 30, 40, 50 people on staff, you're dealing with contracts. Helping organize partnerships. You may be streamlining different offices. The legality of the business, a bigger compliance headache. You are overseeing more than executing. For the smaller RIAs, an operator is more the executor. So the founder is telling them what they want them to do, and then they have to take it and make it a reality. So there's like two different skill sets that you need to have. And I think like you have to kind of grow into like that larger RIA role because it's a lot to juggle. I think overall though, the difference between like someone who isn't seasoned in any role, but specifically like operations is like there's task managers and there's project managers. I think that's the difference. So like if anyone that's listening to this wants to be a good operator, like you really need to learn how to manage projects. So like getting the PMP. And then the other piece, you have to lead yourself well before you can lead others. And so I tell that to my team internally and to like my community, like lead yourself, understand your strengths and your weaknesses, know what you don't know. And then from there, you'll have the opportunity to step in and guide others. But I think the first piece is like understanding who you are before you can go out and, run a practice and run a team.
Yeah, totally. I want to talk a little bit about like that advisor, founder, CEO, visionary type role because I think at least most of the firms that we talk to, like in our ICP, they do have somewhat of a vision for the future. It may not be super, super clear, but they're great at being an advisor and they have that big vision. And it's really the connection between those two. But I think to give founders some credit, I think it's really hard to say, like, to hand that over and to trust somebody enough and to even like start to begin the trust building process. Because I do think, like, and you said this earlier, it's easy to stay steady state once the business has grown enough to sustain itself. You know what I mean? So I don't know exactly where I'm going with this, but I would love to hear your thoughts on kind of that like cracking open of the door of like, okay, I don't need to own everything and I'm going to slowly see what we can do here. I call it calibration internally of like anytime there's a new person coming in to support Zach and there's bumpiness, I label that as like, we're not calibrating. Like there's just a missing, like we need longer calibration period or more clarity or more consistency around what's going on here because there's just something missing. So I would just love to hear your thoughts on like how you guide, because like you said, you're a consultant coming in. How do you guide them around that like slow trust building, like letting go of control exercise?
I'm so passionate about this. This is my favorite part of what I do. I love empowering entrepreneurs. And I think it is tough, but there's a process. So what I tell advisors is, hey, I'm your strategic partner. Let's hash out the details. Let me give you that space where there's no team member, there's no one bias here. Talk to me about what you truly want to do. Talk to me about your problem. So the first piece is like having capacity to work on your business, to talk about these things, and having someone you trust where you could say, hey, I hate that we're doing this and I want to make a change. But Sally on the team has been there for 15 years. And if you talk to Sally about this, she's going to be upset. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like having that space to really talk to someone about it, I think helps. About what you want to do helps. And so then it's like, okay, this is the direction that you want to head. Okay. So you've made the decision. Now, how can I open the door, like to your term, to let someone be a part of this where I can let go? It's like, you've already made the decision. This is where you want to head. And now, like for Level Best, what we do is build that structure, the workflow or the SOP or the guide to plug the team into that process. Now, McKenzie and Company talked about, change management. So like the CEO opens the door, right? And the team's eager to learn, but 70% of change fails because leadership stops caring. They think that they can go in, hey, this is what we're doing. All right, bye. Like that's not the case. A lot of the things that we're changing in practices, it takes like years, right? Like we go in, we make a big change, and someone has to manage that change. Someone has to call a rally of troops, boots on the ground, whatever you want to call it. Like it takes a lot of energy. And I think advisors, CEOs, founders just get burnt out, and something else comes up, something comes across your desk, something's happening in your personal life, and then you're just spread thin. We're all running on fumes as small business owners, so it's just really tough to keep all the balls in the air at the same time. So take that first step to open the door by getting clear on one part of your practice that you want to change, that you're bogged down on, just that one piece. Make a decision on what you want that to look like and hand it off to someone else, and just check in weekly with that person, 15 minutes on the treadmill, walking your dog, whatever it may be. It's like you just have to do one thing at a time.
Charesse, to double click on one thing that I think Kelsey and I see quite often, especially with firms that aren't brand new and trying to sort of build, from the beginning, but are in sort of a transition phase of the business. Mm-hmm. And you touched on team members who have maybe been there for 15 years. I think, and the trust building piece, right? I'm curious how often you're going in, and part of what the advisor founder is contending with is, are some of these people not the right people? Is this a them problem? Or is this a me operator run the business problem? And I would imagine they're, to a certain degree, looking to you to help them determine that. And that's a tough spot, right? Where someone who's been in that business for 15 years and has played a certain role, but are they the right person? Do they fit in whatever new system is being built out? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think there's a lot of human anxiety that's wrapped up in that. That's probably a main reason why advisors don't start to look more broadly about how to fix things, because there's human people with human lives that, are making a paycheck. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. Unfortunately, we have had instances where someone doesn't fit the vision of the firm. And it happens a lot. And so it's really tough. where we start with is like that accountability chart. So what we do at Level Best is we interview the team and get clear on like the dynamics, the skill set that they have. We talk to the CEO about pain points that they're having. Like I can say like in the last year, like we've had several firms say like, hey, this person, like now that we understand where we want to go and we've consulted with you, there's just some people that no longer fit. And so there's like phases to it. I've seen advisors like offer like really great packages, like, like when they separate with people on their team to make sure that they're okay. I've seen advisors reinvent the role. So like, hey, like this is the new direction that we're headed. And I think all firms are going to have to do that with how practices are ran. So that's tough. But it is hard for advisors to make those calls, but most of the time when we come in, those problems were already there. The advisors just didn't know how to get out of it. So like I talked about those cycles. They're like, hey, Charisse, like this is a problem. It's almost like sometimes I feel like they want my permission. They want someone's permission.
Exactly. And we've seen where this is such a natural human thing, right? You don't want to have these very, very hard conversations with these human people who are in your business. And then we watch advisors do really dramatic things to basically circumvent that conversation, right? Talking about moving firms and, potentially selling their company and like things that actually don't fit their vision because of that specifically. They're just not emotionally capable or ready to do the diagnosis part, which is a tactical thing that maybe they're struggling with. But then they sort of know that a lot of times they know in their heart of hearts that it's just not working and it's just not, having that tough conversation. So yeah, I'm sure you have to be the bad guy, if you will, in this framework where, because, hey, we have the consultant who's telling us this reality and that sort of helps them move it forward.
Yeah, it's tough. That's one thing that I focus on is just like that change management piece. But a lot of firms don't have the policy that I have, honest, open, and transparent with their team. They don't have inclusion in their communication. So they're not having these hard conversations. But I think conflict resolution is tough in marriages, like just in personal life and in businesses. And so I definitely understand what advisors are dealing with. But Zach, you're right. A lot of we're seeing 20-year problems. Like I've been working with my assistant for 20 years and, like they just have so many challenges and it's really tough to come in that far along because let's be honest, some of the firms we work with are stuck in their ways and we can't do a transformation for them, but that's okay. We'll get them to their next step. And then when they're ready, they can come back to us or work with another consultant in the industry.
I'm sure one of the reasons that it's great to work with Level Best is because if you do kind of draw the line in the sand and say we are pursuing a transformation, we are changing, what we're doing is not working, and so we're bringing in a consultant. It's not even just like you guys need to be the bad guy, but it's like in general, I think internally the optics of saying we are evaluating what we're doing here and where we're going and how we're leading, and we are taking accountability for what we own and for what we can do to improve this and to get us on the right track to where this business needs to go or where we want to take it. I do think that's probably helpful in terms of just having that moment of reset. And we've had these internally at Seeds, as a startup, it's kind of like when things get off the rails, it's almost like we need to just have a moment to be like, okay, we have to change how we're doing things. This isn't working. So I'm curious, like the change management piece, how much coaching do you guys offer around how to do change management if they don't have a strong operator in place? Are you kind of like, do you have any like frameworks you use? Do you have anything you recommend in terms of them being able to kind of do this the right way going forward, I guess, or manage it or manage change in the most productive way? That's going to be the least painful as well, because I do think there's ways to do this that it's much less painful that I think a lot of advisors, they just don't know. If you have a huge people management problem that's that long, what are your options? How can you look at like, is the role, could you redefine the role? Could you change how you're managing? There's so many things you can be doing other than just being like, I guess this isn't working. We got to just like cut our losses. You know what I mean? So I'm just curious kind of how you coach or train, or do you provide those services or recommend anything to help out with those things?
So I would say that our team, like I'm more internally as consultants, like I'm teaching our team how to go in and influence change in the firm. But one of the things that I do is just make sure the CEO is ready to implement a big change in their practice. So I do that before I even work with RIAs. And so some of the things that I'm looking for is, do they have capacity to do a transformation in their practice? Like, so for example, like I had a client this year, he talked to me 2 years ago and I said, hey, you're not ready. And he came back. And so the reason why I didn't think he was ready was because he didn't have, of course, the bandwidth to work on the business, and he didn't have the support in-house to help him like actually follow through on the ideas that he has. So like those are some of the things that I think about. And then also just the resources financially. So like based on the goals that I'm hearing, it's like, okay, do they have the revenue to support the change that they want to have? So those are the things that I'm looking for ahead of time. And then there's times where I'm really trying to see like, is the advisor really able to lead? Unfortunately, like there's just some advisors out there who aren't good leaders. And so if they're not, I refer them to like a fractional service where someone can actually work in their business to lay the foundation of their practice more better than what a consultant would do. Because we go in, but like there's fractional supports where they're actually in the day-to-day working with the team and things like that, which that's just not what Level Best does.
Okay, that makes sense. And I know we're close to time. We can't let you go without getting your thoughts on tech because you do a lot. You are very familiar with what's going on in firms and what's new in the fintech space especially for our audience for independent advisory firms. So I would love to hear just like what your thoughts are on all the change that we are seeing and where this is going and how firms should be thinking about their tech stack.
Yeah, so I think a few things. So the first observation that I'm seeing is that a lot of advisory firms are going to be moving away from like the general technology that's available and moving more into fintech. So what I mean by that is like we help advisors with technology selection. We help them with implementation. So I think about scheduling software. Like there's a lot of scheduling tools out there, but now Fintech is going deeper. Fintech has your form builders. Fintech has your scheduling software. They have everything. And so in the past, it would be like, okay, we want to automate something. Like you can use something like Zapier, a third-party system to get the tools to speak to each other. But with AI coming into play, the AI tools in Fintech are making automation deeper and native, where you don't need Zapier. Like if you get the right fintech tech stack, all of your systems can be in unison, like they can sync up together. And so like that's a big piece that I'm seeing is like, if you're looking for a tool, look in the fintech space, like don't look outside of it. And I think the firms need people to understand how to manage the technology. So finding ways like how can I teach my team how to utilize the tools? How can I teach my team how to go find the answer for these systems and analyze the systems properly? So I think that's the big shift that I'm seeing in the industry.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I know it was kind of a curveball at the end of this, but I just couldn't let you go without that. Zach, anything else from you?
No, like always with our guests, I feel like we could keep Charesse away from her job for the rest of the day, but we're not going to do that to her. So yeah, Charesse, we would love to, if you could share where people could find you, that would be amazing.
Yeah. So I'm pretty much only on LinkedIn at this point. So you can look up my personal page, Charesse Spiller on LinkedIn. And then if you want to learn more about Level Best or FinOps Co-Op, you can go to getlevelbest.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much. We appreciate you being here. And if folks haven't checked out Seeds, do that as well, www.useseeds.com. And we'll see everybody next time.